audition, not gonna.
If you love wisdom, put your mind up to the ceiling. Don't let it stay in the gutter. Don't let your heart get all cluttered. No, I did not stutter. Listen to all that I've muttered. Your life will only go well if you win wisdom or lovers.
You're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside. Come inside.
The truth will surely rescue you and I.
You and I. You and I.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside. Come inside.
The truth will surely rescue you and I.
All right, what's going on? And good afternoon to you. This is JC Johnson, and you're listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. All right, on today's episode, we're going to be continuing a discussion we started a couple months back. We are talking about the wisdom of tranquility. All right, so I think that this is a really important topic, something that I think that we can all relate to. So let's get into that in just a second. We're going to play a short clip for you, and we'll be right back. You are on North Coast Underground.
If you're in love with wisdom, come inside.
Come inside.
Hey, what's going on, Wisdom family? Each week on For the Love of Wisdom, we promote a new and free audiobook that we believe you will benefit from and become wiser by listening to. On today's show, we're talking about the wisdom of tranquility. And so, the recommended book for this week is The Secret by Rhonda Byrne. This book is about how to begin to understand the hidden, untapped power that is within you and the true magnificence that awaits you. To download this free book today, just visit audibletrial.com/lovewisdom. audibletrial.com/lovewisdom.
All right, welcome back. You're listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. And of course, you know, you're listening on North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. All right, so today we are discussing the wisdom of tranquility. Awesome topic. We actually talked about this a little while back. And if you missed it, no worries. You know, you can always listen to old episodes on iTunes, Spotify, you know, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, iHeart, anywhere where podcasts can be listened to. All right. And also, if you have an Amazon device, you can just say, hey, Alexa, listen to For the Love of Wisdom, and it'll pull that up, so you can do that hands free as well. All right. So we're just trying to make it accessible for everybody. All right. So this show, if you're new, or if it's, you know, maybe something that you're just tuning into after, you know, a long time and you just need a refresher, this show is about philosophy. All right, it's a philosophy show. The meaning of it is the name of the title actually comes from two Greek words that actually make up the word philosophy. Philo means love, and Sophia or Sophos is another Greek word, and that one means wisdom. So when you put those two together, it looks like philosophos, and that's where we get the English word philosophy, and that literally means love of wisdom. And since we're talking about wisdom, it's important to understand what wisdom is, right? So what is wisdom? It's the ability to discern inner qualities and relationships. It's the ability to have insight or good sense and to make proper judgments. Right, so there's a difference between making a good judgment and judging someone, right? Like improperly. Like, if, you know, people always say, don't judge me, but we should want to be judged in certain circumstances. For example, if let's just say there was a crime committed, right? And somebody describes you maybe as a possible suspect, yet somebody else says, no, I don't believe that person could do such a thing. I think that they're innocent because I know this person's character. They would never, you know, steal 500 Twix bars from the grocery store. No, that's not like them, right? You would want somebody to judge you in that circumstance because that judgment is something positive. It's something that will actually help you. So don't be afraid of the word judge. Remember, it can be used positively or negatively, just depending on the context. So we should be able to make good judgments. And also, if somebody wants to judge us, right, they should have the right to do so. As long as you are in the right and not in the wrong, then you should have nothing to worry about. You know, The only time we should be afraid of judgment is if we know we've done something wrong, because that way, in that circumstance, we will be found out for what we have done wrong. So just something to keep in mind here. If you notice, all of the show titles right now, they have the same suffix. Each of the show titles are ending in ity, like we've had generosity, diversity, unity, tranquility, paternity, everything, right? Priority. We've had a lot of different words ending in ity. So that's the theme right now, just for the first season. We're getting ready to enter into our second season in a few weeks, and we're going to switch it up. But just as a reminder, this suffix ity, basically, it just anytime a word ends with ity, all it is, it's basically talking about the condition or quality of being that thing, whatever it is. So if we're talking about diversity, it's the condition or quality of being diverse. If we're talking about equity, it's the condition or quality of being equitable. And in this case, it's the condition or quality of being tranquil. Okay, so again, last week we actually discussed the wisdom of diversity, and diversity is really all about things being equal yet different and unique. And I gave an example about a band and what makes a band good and what would make a band bad. So basically, the thing that most people like about a band is the diversity. So just imagine if everyone in the band was a drummer, right? It might be interesting. Let's just say you got 5 people who hit the kick drum at the same time and 5 people who can hit the snare and the hi-hat at the same time. It's going to be really loud and it's going to sound like the exact same thing. So some people may be amazed at the fact that they can play the same thing together like that, but most people, when they listen to music, they want to hear some diversity. They want to hear somebody on the guitar. They want to hear somebody on the bass. Maybe they want to hear somebody on the piano or on a brass instrument, right? So people want different instruments who are all playing in the same key, right? They're playing the same tempo, right? So you don't want somebody playing 100 tempo when somebody else is playing 63 tempo. It just wouldn't sound right. So as long as everyone is basically playing the same tempo, the same key, and all of that, then it'll sound good when they're playing different instruments. And that's what diversity is all about. It's about really orderly differences, orderly distinctions, right? So we got different sounds, but they all come together and it makes sense. And a great quote from last week, it was from Barbara Boxer, and it said, "We are all different, yet we are all God's children. We are all united behind this country and the common cause of freedom, justice, fairness, and equality. That is what unites us." So it's a great quote about diversity and about equality. And so now we are getting ready to get into the topic for today. On hour 1 of the show, we're going to be discussing the wisdom of tranquility, and that was something that we actually talked about around, shortly after this show was created, actually. So it's a few months ago, and we're revisiting this topic because we still have more to talk about it. So for those of you who are wondering when it was going to come out, because that was part 1, and then we just talked about a whole bunch of other stuff. So now we're actually going to bring it back around, and we're going to conclude that conversation on tranquility. So a great verse in the Bible that sticks out to me when it comes to tranquility is Philippians chapter 4, verse 8. And it says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things." Okay, so I think that this is awesome as we are discussing how to keep your mind tranquil, how to maintain peace within yourself. So before we go any further, let's take a look at what the word tranquility means. According to the American Heritage Dictionary, the word tranquilize means to sedate or relieve of anxiety or tension, to have a calming or soothing effect. So if you think about it, like if somebody gets hit with a tranquilizer dart, right? It's something that it knocks them out. It'll either, make them go to sleep, or it'll bring them to the point where they can't move around. Maybe they can't talk. or something like that. This is the idea of what it means to be tranquil. And I'm not saying that we should be like this, like a person who is, on some heavy drugs or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that internally, within our minds, within our hearts, we should be at such peace that we can rest, that we can have a sense of assurance no matter what's going on around us. Another definition here from the Latin lexicon. The word tranquility literally means to bring peaceful tidings. So figuratively, it just means calm, quiet, peaceful, placid, composed, untroubled, undisturbed, or to be serene. All right. So, and as we talked about in the first part of the discussion on tranquility, we talked about the serenity prayer, right? And how powerful that is, and how that even came to be. And that's something that's used in the 12-step program, and it's something that has really been impactful. People can relate to that because everybody wants that. Everyone wants that sense of peace. But more on that after this. We're gonna go to a short break. You're listening to North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. Be right back.
It's your boy, Tear It Up, Tommy Tom from Beyond Sports, and you're listening to For the Love of Wisdom
with your host, Jason Johnson.
All right, welcome back. You were listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. I'm so glad you can hang out with me this afternoon as we are discussing the wisdom of tranquility. And this is actually a continuation of a conversation that we started a couple months back. I'm thinking, I don't know, maybe May or June was the last time we talked about this. So again, if you want to hear that episode, you can always listen to past episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, iHeart, anywhere where you can listen to podcasts, and you'll be able to catch up with where we are right now. But for now, let's just talk about tranquility and continue the conversation here. Tranquility, as we mentioned before, it's really about being relieved of anxiety or tension. It's about being calm or being soothed, right? So if you look at the word, it is similar to the word tranquilizer or tranquilize, right? And when you think about a tranquilizer gun, what does it do? When it hits somebody, it either makes them fall asleep or it makes them somewhat enter into a state of paralysis where maybe they can't move around. They can't do what they once were able to, right? So that's what that's all about. Mentally, internally. So we're not talking about, again, being knocked out physically to the point where we can't move around or anything like that, but we're talking about having a state of mind, having a state of being within your heart where you're not moved. You're not moved by life circumstances. You're not moved by pain, the different troubles that you experience, but you're able to stand firm, right? You're able to still have peace regardless of what you're going through. And that's what tranquility is about. It's about having that peace that surpasses understanding, to where people won't even understand why you're so peaceful. They'll say, hey, if that were me, I would be pissed off right now. Or if that were me, I think I would be unable to cope with what's going on. But that's the thing about being tranquil, having peace. You're not shaken by what's going on around you. And, tranquility, again, it's something that's impossible to have if you let your mind be controlled by inner turmoil. It's possible to have peace, though, even if there's great chaos going on around you. But you can't have peace if there's great chaos going on inside of you. And that's what it's really all about. And it's a choice. It's a choice to either let your circumstances influence your thinking or to let your thinking influence your circumstances. So just something to keep in mind. One thing that stood out to me lately, in the news, we see Donald Trump has been kind of flirting with this idea of proposing a solution to the Middle East crisis. Okay, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, maybe after the break, but we're going to talk about, how the Middle East even got to that point where they're at today. But the headline here, this was written by the Washington Post. If you don't get it, you don't get it, right? If you're familiar with that, it says that Trump backs two-state solution in Middle East peace talks. So basically what they're saying here is that, Donald Trump thinks that the solution to this Middle East crisis, and by that crisis, I'm talking about this whole tension between Israel and Palestine. His solution basically is to propose there be a second state that would belong to Palestine, that they would be able to be sovereign over, right? So there wouldn't be this whole beef between Israel and Palestine anymore. And this is something that has been proposed before. It didn't work for whatever reason. It's been something that has never worked. And this goes back thousands of years. So this is nothing new. But in this article, it says that basically he hopes within the next 2 to 4 months, he hopes to be able to conclude a deal between Israel and Palestine. And if you've been following this at all, you know that this is something that may sound impossible. This is something that, if it were to happen, would change the world. So he was actually sitting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and they were talking about this. And Donald Trump was basically saying that he thinks the best way for there to be peace in the Middle East is for the Palestinians to have a separate state. And really that's the most he has spoken about this. He has kind of made inferences before, but he hasn't really taken a real definitive stance on this that people can actually follow. But now it seems like this is the direction that he's going into. And Donald Trump seems pretty sure about this. He says, he's quoted as saying that the Palestinians will 100% come to the bargaining table, and said both sides want a deal. Palestinian leaders have, in the past, they've actually boycotted the Trump administration. So they're not necessarily on good terms with him. And the reason why is because back in December, he said that the United States would consider Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel, and that's not what the Palestinians want. So he's already he's already in a bad place in their eyes, right? So some are skeptical that they're gonna want to come to the table with any kind of negotiation with anything that Donald Trump would be proposing. However, he's confident that they are going to take this deal. And Benjamin Netanyahu said that the Palestinians can have powers to govern themselves. So they're not trying to take away any of that. But he says that they can't have the powers to threaten Israel. And that's what Israel has really always wanted. They've always, it hasn't really been a thing of Israel trying to take over Palestine or anything like that. They even gave up a significant portion of their land back in the 60s just to have some peace, which, it still didn't bring peace. Right. But this is something that they've always hoped would happen so that they can, stop this conflict. And one thing Benjamin Netanyahu said is, he says, peace means that all hostilities cease. Not giving the Palestinians means to escalate the conflict. So that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to stop this conflict from escalating, from going any further than what it really needs to be. So that's the heart behind it. Will it happen? Will it not? It's really hard to say, because this thing, again, like I said, it goes back thousands of years. And when we come back, we're going to actually go over how this whole thing started. It all started back in the day with a guy named Abraham, right? And it's crazy how one decision that he made has infected or it has affected the whole world since then. So one thing to keep in mind also, as this relates, because we're talking about tranquility today. We're not necessarily talking about the Middle East, but how this relates is that this conflict that we have between these two countries is the perfect example of what it's like when there's a conflict within your soul. When you have an unrest, when you're not at peace, it's almost as if two nations were fighting against each other. That's how serious it can be. When your heart is fighting against what's going on in your mind, or maybe when your heart or your mind is divided, and maybe the left lobe is arguing with the right lobe, and you just don't have peace. You just are not in a place where you're able to say, you know what, no matter what, I'm not going to be moved. And I think if these two countries were able to do that, to have that kind of peace, that tranquility amongst themselves, the world would be a much different place, right? But more on that after this. You are listening to North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you, and this is For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets.
Hey, what's up? It's your girl Queen Z from the Queen Z Show, and you are listening to For the Love of Wisdom.
Right, welcome back. You are listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. And of course, you're listening on North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. All right, so on today's episode, we're talking about the wisdom of tranquility, right? And we were looking at the one of the headlines that's in the news. This actually just came out a couple days ago, and this is talking about how, well, actually yesterday, and this is talking about how Donald Trump is proposing a two-state solution in order to solve this conflict between Israel and Palestine. And so one thing I said before the break, I said that I was going to kind of go over how we even got to this place in the first place. Why is there this great beef between Israel and Palestine? All right. So it all goes back to a time when a guy named Abraham, if you're not familiar with him, he is a central figure of the Bible. He is someone you can find in the book of Genesis who God gave a promise to, and he told Abraham that he was going to be the father of many nations, right? So he promised that he was going to give him a son, and through his son he was going to birth this great nation. And the thing about it was that Abraham at the time was old. I believe he was 75 when God first told him this, and his wife was also of age as well. And so both of them, they were like, well, I don't see how this is possible. I don't see how this is ever going to happen. And if you think about it, I mean, most women now, they go through menopause, somewhere within their 40s and their 50s, right? So we're talking about them being up there in age, right? Beyond 60. And God is telling them, you're going to have a child. So it didn't happen. 25 years go by, still no child. Okay. So at this point, they're even older, right? And so they're thinking, I don't know if this is going to happen. I don't know if God knows what he's talking about here. So maybe we missed something. Maybe we need to take matters into our own hands. And this kind of leads to why we see things being the way that they are today between Israel and Palestine. So basically what Abraham and Sarah decided, they decided this together. So don't just think this was Abraham's idea. They both decided together that what they were going to do is they were going to use Sarah's maid servant, because back then, a lot of people, they had like women maid servants that would live with them and take care of a lot of the household duties and things like that. And so this woman, Hagar, she was younger, right? And she was of childbearing age. So they figured that she would be the perfect person to be able to have a child with. So with Sarah's consent, basically what Abraham did was he and Hagar, they had sex and they produced a child together, right? And this child's name is Ishmael. Now, the whole controversy with this is that even though this was a child, this was a son that Abraham had, God said, no, this is not the one that I promised to you. This is not the one that I was talking about. So basically what happened is that Abraham eventually ended up having another son, but he didn't have this son with Hagar. He actually had this son with Sarah, even though both of them were much older at the time. I think Abraham was 100 and Sarah was about 90 at the time. But, God, did fulfill the promise he gave to them, and they had a son named Isaac. But the whole thing is basically that everyone who is a descendant of Isaac, these are people who are associated with modern day Israelites, because Isaac had a son named Jacob. And guess what Jacob's name was changed to? Jacob's name was changed to Israel. Okay? And so everyone who came after Jacob or Israel is called children of Israel. They're called, a child of that lineage, basically. So these are who we consider to be the Jewish people of today that are living in Israel. Yet anyone who came from Ishmael, which was Abraham's first son, these are people who would be associated more with modern day Islamic people or Muslims, right? Because both sides kind of went in two different directions. And God promised Abraham that he would still bless Ishmael and his descendants, even though he wasn't the promised child, right? But because Isaac was the first child that was really supposed to have all of the promise, all of the blessings and everything, he was blessed as well. So you have these two men who both have been blessed by God, whose descendants are blessed, but they're going in two completely different directions. So this is the reason why there's this beef between Israel and Palestine today, because the whole thing is God not only gave Abraham the promise of a child, but he also gave him the promise of land and a place where his descendants could live. And so it just so happens that these two areas, Israel and Palestine, they're really all a part of one big area. It's this land of Canaan. It's the place that God had promised to Abraham initially. And that's why they're fighting over this land to this day, because both sides are basically saying, hey, I have a right to this land. So Israel's saying I have a right to it. Palestine is saying I have a right to it. And it's really hard to say who really deserves it right now. According to the Bible, most Jewish and Christian people would say that this land rightfully belongs to Israel, because the promise was initially given to Isaac, or to the descendant of Abraham, which was supposed to be Isaac. Yet the Palestinians or Muslims, they will say, well, how is that right? Because Ishmael came from Abraham, so he's really the one who deserves the land. We are the true descendants of Abraham. We were the first, because Ishmael was the firstborn, right? So that's the whole thing about it. But one thing about the Bible, it does say that, the first shall be last, the last shall be first, right? So it's not always just about who was the firstborn and who was not. Ultimately, it comes down to who God has chosen and who God has not chosen. So that goes into a whole nother thing, right? And people, that's why there's this great controversy. Who's right? Are the Muslims right? Are the Jews right? That's what this whole thing has been about for the last few thousand years. And that's why there's so much controversy between these two countries. And I don't think, as well-intentioned as Donald Trump or anyone else might be, this is not going to be solved with a simple treaty. This has been going on for a long time, and it's been going on for a reason. Ultimately, when someone thinks that they're right about something, and they've been willing to hold on to it for this many years, It's something that's not going to just be solved with simply sitting down with over a cup of coffee and signing a couple papers, and that's going to be it. It's much deeper than that, right? This thing goes way back. But it's going to be interesting to see how all of this transpires. Things have been heating up in the Middle East lately, and only God really knows how this is all going to turn out. The best thing that we can do is, pray for them and pray for ourselves as well as a nation, because whether we like it or not, we're right in the middle of all of this, and whatever happens there is going to have an impact on us. So let's just keep that in mind, not to scare you or anything like that, but it's just reality. We can't be so United States centric that we don't pay attention to what's going on in other parts of the world. It's important to be aware. But more on that after this. We're going to play some music and then come right back. You're listening to North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you.
This is your girl, Juicy Jazzo, and I wanted to let you know I'm all about wisdom. Knowledge is power, power is money, and money makes the world go round. And you're listening to For the Love of Wisdom right now, bleeding out your speakers.
All right, welcome back. You were listening to For the Love of Wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. And of course, you're listening on North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. All right, so right now we are talking about the wisdom of tranquility. And before the break, we were discussing this whole controversy between Israel and Palestine and how it all got started. And really the way that it got started was because Abraham, who's a guy in the Bible, in the book of Genesis, he was, promised a son. And the son, though, was supposed to come through his wife, Sarah. Abraham ended up having another son with Sarah's maidservant, and her name is Hagar. Now, this was done with Sarah's consent. However, it wasn't done with God's consent, apparently, because this wasn't the promised child. Now, God still blessed the child that he had with him, whose name was Ishmael, but he said that basically there's still another promised child that needs to come from this. So basically that child was Isaac, and these two men, and their descendants have been pretty much battling ever since, and this was thousands of years ago. The descendants of Isaac are modern day Jews, or those who live in Israel, and the descendants of Ishmael are Muslims who are in Palestine, right? And the whole thing is, who deserves the land more? Is it the Palestinians or is it the Israelites? So it's an interesting thing. It's pretty interesting how this has all happened throughout the years. People always talk about peace in the Middle East, but unless one side is willing to basically denounce their entire lineage, their heritage, and say, we were wrong, you guys were right, unless that happens, which is very unlikely, I don't think that there's ever going to be any true peace in the Middle East. And I think that the most important thing is, regardless of whether or not there is peace within a country or within a job or within any kind of context, the main thing is, do you have peace inside of you? Do you have internal peace? Do you have mental peace? Do you have peace within your heart? Because that's what really matters. That's the only thing that you have control over. We don't have control over whether or not there's peace in Cleveland, or if there's peace in Detroit, or if there's peace in Kuwait, or if there's peace in Sudan, right? We don't have any control over that. All we have control over is whether there's peace within ourselves. Now, one thing that we talked about also earlier is that the book of the week for this week is actually The Secret. And I think that The Secret is a really powerful book because it talks about really how you can kind of take control over your thoughts, because your thoughts ultimately impact the outcome of your life. And here's just a couple quotes from the book that really stood out to me. One of them here says, be grateful for what you have now. As you begin to think about all the things in your life that you're grateful for, you will be amazed at the never-ending thoughts that come back to you of more things to be grateful for. You have to make a start, and then the law of attraction will receive those grateful thoughts and give you more just like them. So that's pretty powerful. Again, this just goes into how what you think ultimately influences the outcome of your life. If you have good thoughts, if you have grateful thoughts, then that's what your life is going to be like. But if you are just, complaining, or you're only thinking about the negative, it's going to be hard to either see or experience positive outcomes. So that's a pretty good quote from the book there. Here's another one. It says, there is no such thing as a hopeless situation. Every single circumstance of your life can change. And that's really powerful. That's really important too, because basically what this is saying is that nothing is too bad, right? Nothing is too harsh. Nothing is too far gone. Anything can change. What it is, though, is that you have to just be willing to believe that. You have to be willing to understand that anything can change. If you don't think it can change, then most likely it won't. A lot of the times it depends on you. Another one from the book here is, it says, a lot of people feel like they're victims in life, and they'll often point to past events, perhaps growing up with an abusive parent or in a dysfunctional family. Most psychologists believe that about 85% of families are dysfunctional. So all of a sudden, you're not so unique. And this is really important too, because I think that this takes away excuses for a lot of people. Now, not to make light of anything that anyone has been through, but this is basically saying that when you talk about a dysfunctional family, this is not something that's uncommon. It's not like only 5% of the world have people who have come from a dysfunctional family. What this is saying is this is the majority, 85%. So 85% is the majority. So most people come from a dysfunctional family. Why is that? Because we live in a dysfunctional world. There's a lot going on in this world, a lot of evil going on, and it's nothing new. It's nothing uncommon. Another good quote that stood out to me, it says, if you are feeling good, it is because you are thinking good thoughts. Remember that your thoughts are the primary cause of everything. So that's a pretty good one right there. Something to really keep in mind. Ultimately, this is saying that your thoughts are going to influence the outcome of things. So it's pretty good. So that's pretty much it for the topic of tranquility for now. When we come back from the break, we're actually going to be discussing a new topic. So just stay tuned. You are listening to North Coast Underground, where the underground starts with you. And this is your host, JC Johnson, for the love of wisdom, where philosophy meets the streets. All right, we'll be right back in a little bit. Stay tuned.
Knowledge is power, power is money, and money makes the world go round. Money, power, respect, I get it, higher, learning, yeah, I'm with it. Only get better with time, you got on my mind with wisdom, there's no limit. There's no limit, get up and get it. Can achieve the impossible, conquer every obstacle. Exhausting, grinding, constantly pushing, do what they say I could. Life is what you make it. Knowledge is power, don't let them take it.
If you're in love with wisdom,